What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you were into the fight talk. I want to discuss this undercard to Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder III. Rarely in boxing do we get an undercard that's this deep. And I'm only covering the co-main, which is Efe Ajagba versus Frank Sanchez, and then the rematch between Robert Helenius and Adam Kownacki. Now, there are also a couple fights even below that, before that, during the evening, that are worth mentioning, like Julian J. Rock Williams is going to be returning to the ring. But usually in boxing events, even the high profile ones, you might get one that's deep enough for you to really care about the fight just before the main event. And sometimes it's not even that deep. But in this case, I mean, we've got a second and third fight that are, just the matchups and the fact that Ajagba and Sanchez are meeting each other at this early stage of their careers where they are basically prospects who would otherwise usually be getting elevated against more carefully chosen opponents than to go head on. That would be like Virgil Ortiz taking on Jerome Boots Ennis, like right now, you know? Not to say that Ajagba and Frank Sanchez are quite on that level in terms of skill, but hey, in terms of the heavyweight division, the landscape of the division, and what the future might hold, Ajagba is, right now with Shakur Stevenson's team, his trainer and so forth, K. Chroma, whereas Frank Sanchez is, the Cuban fighter, undefeated right now with a great amateur pedigree, and he's now with Canelo's team, trained by Eddie Reynoso. So both of these guys are in with the right people. Efe Ajagba is currently managed by Jay Prince, the, Rap-A-Lot Records, hip-hop mogul, entrepreneur. He was one of the first independent rap labels. Has been super significant in the boxing world. I'm a longtime manager of Andre Ward. But yeah, having Ajagba versus Sanchez in this stage just makes for an exciting co-main event. And then obviously we'll get into Helenius versus Kownacki, the rematch. But this main event, Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder III, along with the co-main event, Ajagba versus Sanchez and Helenius versus Kownacki, all in the heavyweight division. So this is going to be very interesting and hopefully very exciting. But I want to kick things off with Efe Ajagba, 15 wins and 0 losses, taking on Frank Sanchez, 18 wins, 0 losses, and 1 no contest. So both of these guys are relatively young, 27 years old for Ajagba, 29 years old for Sanchez, but they've had very different paths. Sanchez is of, Cuban descent. They've got a huge pedigree in boxing from Teofilo Stevenson, who at one point was supposed to have a dream super fight exhibition with Muhammad Ali in the 70s. And obviously everybody from, Guillermo Rigondeaux, Erislandy Lara, Joel Casamayor, and many in decades even previous to these. Cuba is one of those countries that is known, as well as they're known for baseball, they're known for boxing. And they have the Farm, which is the Cuban boxing program, essentially, that cranks out so many talented fighters, some of which never end up defecting and fighting in the United States. So some of the greatest could have been careers actually stayed in Cuba. But Frank Sanchez not only made his way eventually to the States, but now finds himself with one of the best teams in boxing, and that is Canelo Alvarez, Eddie Reynoso, and that squad. But Sanchez, long amateur career, whereas Ajagba from Nigeria, which, can we just say, Nigeria is so on the map now in the combat sports world. Look at what they're doing at the UFC. From Israel Adesanya, who's of Nigerian descent. He's a champion at middleweight, 185. Francis Ngannou just knocked out Stipe Miocic and captured the UFC heavyweight title. Well, technically, Ngannou's from Cameroon, but just look at a map of Africa. Cameroon borders Nigeria. And then you've got the Nigerian-born Kamaru Usman, who's currently the champion at 170. So 170, which is MMA welterweight, 185 middleweight, and heavyweight, all have champs that are either Nigeria or Nigeria adjacent. So Nigeria is certainly making its presence felt in the sports world, combat sports world. So just looking at the promise that Ajagba has been showing, even though he was kind of a late comer to boxing, he didn't start until he was 17, which is pretty young to get into the game. Not as young as their common opponent, Ajagba and Sanchez's common opponent, which is Brian Howard, who didn't start boxing until he was like 26 years old. Very, very late to get into the game. But because Ajagba has been showing so many physical attributes and such prodigious power, and pair that with the showings of the Nigerians I just mentioned in the UFC, so a lot of people are just looking at Ajagba like, are you about to do some damage in the heavyweight division here? So I had first seen Ajagba on some undercards, and then I saw him fight Kownacki. This was like in 2020, March 7th, which is kind of a boxing day that'll live in infamy because that was the last weekend before they implemented the U.S. shutdowns due to the COVID pandemic. So this was actually on the undercard of Kownacki versus Helenius 1. And Kownacki's kind of a stationary big guy, even bigger than Ajagba, who himself is like 6'6". So Ajagba's like of that super heavyweight variety. Think Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, Luis Ortiz. Big heavyweights, 240, 245 plus. Whereas Frank Sanchez, unlike his fellow Cuban Luis Ortiz, Frank Sanchez is actually a smaller heavyweight, closer to 220 pounds. Not to mention Frank Sanchez having a 78-inch reach in comparison to Efe Ajagba's 85-inch reach. Big reach advantage. So here's the thing. When you see Ajagba fighting Kownacki's kind of stationary, but he keeps coming forward. So this ended up being a much more competitive fight than people who would want to be accelerating Ajagba's career would want to see him in. People want to see him like knocking his opponents out. But you also want to develop enough skills to where when you start fighting tougher opponents that you're well equipped and prepared to take these guys on. Because there's only a certain amount of fronting you could do. If you don't have the skills that'll pay the bills, you will get exposed at a certain level. So Kownacki to me was like it was a 9th round stoppage. So Ajagba got the finish of Kownacki. It just took him a while, and it took for Kownacki's energy output to reduce until he was more and more vulnerable to those right hands that eventually got him out of there. But Ajagba's next fight against Jonathan Rice, this was supposed to be another showcase for Ajagba against Jonathan Rice, who was actually a latecomer to the sport. He didn't start until I think like 24 or something. But he's a natural athlete. Like he was an ex-football player. So you see the way that he moves, and he has kind of like a jazzy rhythm to his game where he's comfortable enough to kind of drop his lead arm, even though that's dangerous. And it ended up costing Ajagba's next opponent, Brian Howard, who actually got stopped by Frank Sanchez and then by Ajagba in succession. Brian Howard lost back-to-back by knockout, first to Sanchez, where Howard was competitive for a few rounds, then got knocked out, and then fought Ajagba, and that was the one where Ajagba had the viral moment where he just lined him up for the right hand. It's almost like he didn't really jab to the body, but he pawed his left hand out, just laid into Howard with the right hand that Timothy Bradley and Andre Ward were saying sounded like a shotgun blast because of how it hit Howard. And Howard was in the motion of punching, and he ended up just flat on his face with his body and arms twisted. Scary moment, but that was Ajagba's most recent fight. But that fight before the Brian Howard vicious KO was against the jazzy latecomer Jonathan Rice, who actually fought a very competitive decision loss against Ajagba. And this is one of those fights where, because it was supposed to be a showcase for Ajagba, and it ended up being a kind of net neutral type of fight where nobody ever really took control. Like you had Jonathan Rice, that was, who has a nice right hand himself, that was just looking to land one big bomb, and he would be defensively elusive enough where Ajagba just wasn't able to comfortably just land the jab hand repeatedly, because you got the sense that Jonathan Rice, like if they were to play hot hands, or if they were to slap box, that Jonathan Rice might actually be more rhythmic than Ajagba, who's more, a little bit more robotic in his rhythm. Like when I see Ajagba fight, I see almost like at this stage of his game, Vladimir Klitschko light. Like he doesn't have the full arsenal that Klitschko had, nor is he nice enough with his feet. Like Vladimir Klitschko wasn't as jazzy with the feet as his big brother Vitaly, but he got to be pretty comfortable in his distance control and just controlling like the range, and usually being the bigger fighter at 6'6", being able to jab you to death while lining you up for a deadly right hand. But unlike Ajagba, Vladimir Klitschko had a fully developed left hook, a beautiful left hook. Look at the way he fought Ray Mercer. That was one of the first times, I'd actually seen Vladimir Klitschko well before the Ray Mercer fight, but that was the one that supplanted in my mind. Damn, Vladimir Klitschko is a problem, because Ray Mercer was a dangerous fighter, and he had fought the best of his generation, some great champions. But Ajagba, because of his posture in the ring and the way that he likes to kind of risk mitigate, doesn't want to get into a fight where both guys are trading combinations and are doing a ton of infighting. He'd rather keep it here. Again, he's 6'6" with an 85-inch reach. He needs to get better equipped with that lead hand, though. I mean, he's able to jab guys who are more stationary, like Kownacki. But against somebody who moves their head and moves around the ring, like Frank Sanchez, his next opponent, he's going to have to do busier work. Think even when Anthony Joshua displayed the improving jab against Andy Ruiz in their rematch. Ajagba has to take his construct. If he's going to be kind of robotic, then it is what it is. That's just the type of fighter he's going to be. But you really need to make use of that reach. Even if you just do the thing where, because you've got the reach advantage, just kind of probe with it. It doesn't always have to be a jab, which sometimes Ajagba's confident in throwing a snappy jab, and other times he's just like trying to find something. Like, and Richard Dwyer, boxing analyst online, pointed this one out, where he just needs to touch you before feeling comfortable enough to throw that right hand. But Ajagba also would be well served in developing a nice, crisp left hook, because that varies what the other guy's got to worry about. So then not only can you pop him with a jab and hit him with a vicious or just a nice turn of the wrist type of long range left hook, but now if you could also just probe. You know, in the UFC, if you got like an open hand, the ref will warn you, say close your fingers when you just kind of put it out there. Think like John Jones. Think Lennox Lewis would do it sometimes, where the glove, Tyson Fury does it as well. The glove looks half open because you're just kind of putting your hand on his forehead so you can measure him, make sure you're out of range. But you're also blinding the guy, so if you want to throw something hard on top of that, it's available to you. Efe Ajagba will continue to work on these things, I'm sure. As I mentioned, he's with the great camp. But now he's got Frank Sanchez in front of him. And unlike some of these showcasey type fights, Frank Sanchez thinks that he could be the best in the world. He's not here to play the B-side, the, hey, I'm happy to be here and it was an honor to share the ring with you type. No, Frank Sanchez is with a very confident team. He comes from a very accomplished background. So he's looking at this fight like, hey, I'm the one who's been putting in the 10,000 hours here. Let's see what you got, Efe. But I think that one of the things that sort of levels this out is the size discrepancy. Like the Bridger weight initiated by the WBC, there's actually a reason for that. It's because certain guys, if you're 215, 220, too big for cruiserweight, but you're not comfortable enough to get in there with somebody 30 to 35 pounds heavier than you are, some of these 250 and up beasts, then they're actually making space where you can still hold the title and hold your head high, because you are at least the best of the guys who are 225 and are trying to compete for this lesser heavyweight, Bridger weight title. But Frank Sanchez, like Deontay Wilder, is like, nah, I'm good. I want to bang with the bigs. So he's got one in front of him in Efe Ajagba. And so if you look at some of Frank Sanchez's fights, like the one against Daweshko, I've had problem pronouncing that one, but this is a dude who's like almost Andy Ruiz size, but even a few inches shorter. Andy Ruiz, by the way, is like 6'3", so he's not short. He's just very, very wide. Well, Daweshko looks more like the rapper Action Bronson. He's just short, squat, but he's got kind of like a slick style. Like, you know what I mean? He's like one of these guys who just has that kind of iconic, confident, you know, I'll just sit back, let you do your thing, and I kind of look cute, roll with your punches, and then try to find opportunities to let my hands go. Because Daweshko's got very short arms. Very different type of fighter than Efe Ajagba. So Frank Sanchez wasn't able to put Daweshko away. Daweshko's durable, and again, he's got sneaky counter-punching abilities, but he was outclassed in this case by Frank Sanchez. But it's almost not even worth getting into that fight as it pertains to Sanchez versus Ajagba, because the opponents are so different. So let's talk Brian Howard, that guy who got knocked out in back-to-back fights versus Sanchez and Ajagba. With Howard, you know, he was actually giving Sanchez some like early issues just because of how athletic and confident his stance was, where he's a bigger or at least taller guy who's dropping his hands and looking for opportunities to kind of pot shot you with his own right hand, or roll with something and come back, or throw like a lead hook a la Roy Jones. But it's almost like, don't try this at home. Like when you see people trying to imitate Floyd Mayweather's Philly shell, like Andre Berto when he went against a left-handed Robert Guerrero. Don't try this at home if you aren't absolutely comfortable with fighting in this style. Well, Brian Howard had his moments, but Frank Sanchez, with his ring mobility and just the speed of his like pocket entry, where he starts letting his hands go, Frank Sanchez is pretty confident and commanding, but he does slow down at times. If you could bring him into the middle rounds, then he becomes becomes a little bit more like I'm moving like this, but I'm not moving my feet as much, which will serve Ajagba very well if he doesn't get blasted out of the pocket. If Sanchez doesn't come in and make his presence absolutely felt, where Ajagba gets gun shy, like we recently saw Anthony Joshua against Usyk, where when the guy's just kind of out tit for tatting you and you realize, damn, this guy's able to more or less hit me at will. I'm not seeing all of these punches coming, and I'm having trouble finding range and finding his face with my jab. By the way, jabs to the bodies can go a long way in mitigating and solving that problem, but you also have to have the confidence in going low because you run the risk of getting hit over the top if you do jab to the body. But Efe Ajagba, if he could get into the middle rounds, I expect Sanchez to kind of slow down, where Ajagba should have a slightly easier time finding the head with the jab, even if he has difficulty early. Ajagba can't get discouraged by not finding him early. And I think that some of these fights that Ajagba went late in are going to be good practice for finding and wearing down the smaller Frank Sanchez over time. And I actually think that that's what's going to happen. Look, I think that the first few rounds in this one are going to be very interesting. There's a chance that Frank Sanchez can score a relatively early stoppage of Ajagba. And there's always, obviously, the possibility that Ajagba can find him with the right hand and make this a short night, which would be devastating to somebody whose hopes are as high as Frank Sanchez in terms of how promising he's been looking early on some of these, Canelo Alvarez undercard fighters. Frank Sanchez is one of these guys who got to America just a few years ago, started trying, wanted to get as busy as possible. Like, he fought something like 10 times in 2018 and then 4 times in 2019. And then he fought again in that last weekend before the pandemic hit against the WhatsGoodWoog on, again, the Kownacki versus Helenius undercard. But then the pandemic hit. So he's one of these guys who found the opportunity like, damn, no, I don't care if there's no crowd. I don't care if I get paid this versus that. I'm hungry. I'm trying to make a statement here. I need to go ahead and make my presence felt and get bigger and bigger fights. So he got busy, very busy during the pandemic. In fact, so Kownacki nor Helenius have fought since March 7th of 2020, whereas Ajagba has fought twice and Sanchez has fought 3 times. So what am I expecting with Ajagba versus Sanchez? Again, I think Sanchez could very well have his moments early. I think Ajagba is going to do enough to make it into round 4 and 5. I think that Sanchez is going to win a couple of the early rounds. I don't know if they'll split in the first 4, but I think there's going to come a time where Ajagba shows mid-round power, where Sanchez starts getting a little tired, gets either caught or near caught, but basically there's a light switch that goes off and says, oh my God, this guy could get me out of here right now, and this guy is hitting hard as hell. Again, there's going to be like a 30-pound weight differential unless Sanchez comes in uncharacteristically heavier than 220, maybe 225. But again, Sanchez is a mover. He moves, he could come in, he could go out, but how long can you stay on that treadmill pace? Sanchez being a bouncer, footwork-wise, versus Ajagba being more of a step and slider is going to do a service to Ajagba, because I think there's more energy preservation in that style, to where I think that his style is going to wear a little bit better. Plus, he's the bigger fighter into the middle rounds. If Sanchez is going to stop coming at Ajagba so aggressively and is going to start being a little bit more patient. And I think that, like Vladimir Klitschko in a lot of his fights, I think that there's going to be a steady digest of Ajagba's jab over the slightly reduced in mobility, less head movement over time, less footwork over time, just slowing down Frank Sanchez to where in the middle and late rounds, Ajagba starts taking control and Sanchez doesn't stay confident and aggressive and kind of he doesn't get, I don't think he gets stopped here. I think he kind of concedes to a decision loss, where it might even look less than spectacular in the last few rounds, where it's like, damn, Sanchez really didn't go for it in the last few rounds, ended up playing a little bit of a survivalist game. Again, this is just my conjecture, but I see Ajagba taking control and actually winning a decision win over Sanchez. But again, both of these guys could stop one another. I'm just saying that I could see the tempo of the fight playing out to where Sanchez has the early success, starts kind of cooling off in the middle rounds. Ajagba starts saying, hey, yeah, this guy's not going to be able to keep on moving like this. Let me keep on backing this guy down and making him just stay out, keep him in the outside. Don't let him keep on coming up in my chest and in my face to where I have to hold, or this guy could hit me with an uppercut, which, by the way, it would also serve Ajagba to develop a counter uppercut to people trying to jump into the pocket. But that's another story for another day. I don't think it's going to be developed by this fight, but I think that he's going to show enough dangerous punches in the early to middle rounds to where he's going to have Frank Sanchez's respect in the middle to late rounds, Ajagba via decision. Now let's get into Robert Helenius versus Adam Kownacki 2. Robert Helenius, 30 wins and 3 losses versus Adam Kownacki, 20 wins and 1 loss. That 1 loss is obviously to Robert Helenius in his very last fight, in a fight that Adam Kownacki was a huge favorite. Look at the money that you could have gotten if you went with Robert Helenius. Now, I did have concerns about Adam Kownacki going into this fight because of how much he got punched versus Chris Arreola in his previous fight, where they set like a heavyweight record for punches landed in a 12-rounder. Like, you know, Adam Kownacki was just knocking on the door of the ring-recognized top 10 in the heavyweight division. He was just outside of like the Joseph Parkers and the Andy Ruizes. He was just outside of that because he was beating slightly better and better competition. It was no longer like the Artur Szpilkas like he did in 2017 when he knocked Szpilka out in the 4th round. He beat Charles Martin via decision. Charles Martin somehow, ended up with a championship belt and ended up getting knocked out by Anthony Joshua, and that was actually Anthony Joshua's first title. It was versus Charles Martin. But Adam Kownacki decision won over Charles Martin, and then he knocked out Gerald Washington, and Gerald Washington has actually knocked out Robert Helenius. So going into Kownacki versus Helenius 1, Helenius was like 36 or something years old, and he was kind of like the journeyman by this point. Now, granted, he's only lost 3 fights. He's beaten, he's got a decision win over Derek Chisora in a fight that he won by decision, but most people who are watching the fight thought that Derek Chisora kind of got jobbed in that one. It was a split decision win for Helenius. But man, you seen Chisora now get the unfavorable end of the stick in decisions versus Helenius, versus Joseph Parker, versus Alexander Usyk. Like, he's always or often in the fight, and he fought a very competitive fight with an old Vitaly Klitschko. I mean, no, people weren't just beating Vitaly Klitschko, and Derek Chisora fought a very spirited fight versus him. So that one really got my attention. I'm like, damn, okay, note to self, take Chisora seriously. And he's just had a spirited career. But Helenius got the decision win over him, and he's also, been in there with the distance with Dillian White. So Helenius has fought some of the top fighters, and I mean, when he's winning and knocking the guys out, he looks like a tower. It's like, man, this guy looks like he could be like one of the elite fighters, but then he'll, get knocked out by Duhaupas. That was the one that really kind of set his career back, because he was collecting like these European titles as early as like 10 years ago. So like in 2010, he was fighting for these like regional titles. And Helenius really didn't have his first setback until like 2016. Like he went into that fight 22-0, and he was again collecting regional titles 5 years prior, but he got knocked out in the 6th round by Johan Duhaupas, and that was like a pretty big setback. He won his next few, and then he lost via decision to Dillian White. So he's been one of these guys who will beat most guys, but then when that's not even when he has a huge step up in class, but he'll just lose when he's got all the momentum going in. So every time he like scales the mountain, he just gets knocked off again. But given his experience and his ability to finish fighters, there was concern when Adam Kownacki was going into the ring against Robert Helenius, because as he was kind of being billed while Helenius was kind of having this like journeyman style career, Kownacki was like being put higher and higher on some undercards, and then started having his own fight nights like this one against Arreola that ended up being way more of a slugfest than you would have thought it should have been, because Kownacki was not only climbing up the rankings and getting increased attention from PBC because he's a Polish New Yorker. There was a big fan base that was building for Kownacki, but he's kind of like a patient hunter. Like, he's not a footwork guy. He's got slow feet like Andy Ruiz has slow feet. But he's somebody who likes to let their hands go. So what he does is he starts like kind of dipping, feinting, just like some trunk movement. Something that Efe Ajagba doesn't show a ton of. You know, I was just talking to Ajagba. Sanchez doesn't show a ton of trunk movement. Sanchez does. You know, Kownacki does have a little bit of these little nuanced things that'll get the guy to like open up, so then you throw, you know, a couple punches. And what you're trying to do ultimately is kind of get the guy to start backing up into the ropes so you can sort of corner and trap him and then let some power punches go. That's what Kownacki likes to do. But against Arreola, unlike the fight, you know, unlike when Kownacki fought Gerald Washington or Charles Martin, Arreola made him pay consistently. Like I said, there was a record set in that fight for punches landed. Just continuously made Kownacki pay for getting reckless in his, where he keeps his hands, if he's keeping his head on the center line. Kownacki was not doing enough movement, and that's kind of what separates a lot of these guys who have long, sustainable careers versus the ones who start looking kind of hot and then get their chin checked and destroyed a couple times to where they're never really the same fighter, and then they end up just being the B-side to like other guys as like step-up fights going forward. When I saw Kownacki versus Arreola, even though Kownacki won the fight via unanimous decision, I was thinking, how sustainable is this approach? But I didn't think that Helenius would be the guy to make him pay ultimately and to deliver him his first loss. But that's exactly what Helenius did. He knocked him out in the 4th round. Kownacki got hurt badly in the 3rd round and then got finished in the 4th. Because again, Helenius is a super tall fighter. We're talking 6'7" versus 6'3" Adam Kownacki. So think about it. Anthony Joshua was 6'6" to Andy Ruiz's 6'3", 3-inch height advantage for AJ. Helenius versus Kownacki, 4-inch height advantage. So if you don't get out of the way and account for Helenius's straight right hand, like, you will suffer. And that's exactly what Kownacki did. So I think coming into this rematch, he's got his game face on. He knows, I can't let this guy drill me like that. So I think that he's going to have to show more head movement, and I think that he's going to have to hurt Helenius, or at least do something to discourage Helenius from letting his hands go freely. So will Kownacki, the babyface, be able to make the adjustments needed to rectify the result versus Helenius? You know, I think he will. I think he's going to be very serious and a little bit more mindful on his defense. But I think that he'll actually be able to, if not drop, hurt Helenius at a certain point to where Helenius finds himself looking for opportunities to land the big punch, but is getting boxed kind of moment by moment. Look, Helenius did flash a nice jab, and there's a reason why he was able to set him up with the right hand. It's because he was getting pretty busy with his left jab, being able to punch downward at Kownacki, who was eating jabs before he ate the right. But I think Kownacki is going to be able to pin Helenius enough where he kind of takes control of this one. And because if he lets Helenius stick around to the 8th, 9th, and 10th, that Helenius will still be dangerous and can pull off a late knockout of Kownacki, I think Kownacki's actually, it's tough. Will Kownacki finish him in the early to mid rounds? I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. But does Helenius have enough fuel to keep on making Kownacki pay during some of the slow moments or some of the moments where Kownacki is recklessly entering the pocket? Maybe. I just feel like the most likely scenario is that the first couple rounds take on a slower pace than in the first fight, because these guys came in guns blazing first couple rounds in this first fight. I think it's going to be a slower start to this next fight, and I think that Kownacki is going to start doing some of the more nuanced things that got him success in his earlier fights before suffering this knockout. And I think that he's going to be able to trap Helenius a few times. It's just hard for me to picture how he's going to be able to win a decision without at some point getting hurt by Helenius. Like, if Helenius is sticking around and is going to be the taller fighter who doesn't have to do as much to close the range because it's a 79-inch reach versus a 76-inch reach, you know, I kind of think that why do I feel compelled to pick Kownacki if all signs are kind of pointing to a repeat of the first fight? I don't know. I just think that there is something that was elite or near elite in Kownacki, and I think that he's good enough to make enough defensive adjustments to where he doesn't get drilled and caught the way that he did in the first fight. Now, but does he get Helenius out of there? I mean, Helenius, again, went the distance versus Dillian Whyte. You know, I'm actually going to pick Kownacki versus not a lackluster decision, but something that's less than explosive. I think Kownacki's actually going to win the decision here. And that is pretty much a testament to Helenius' experience. Like, okay, no, I wasn't able to deck him with the right hand, but I still had enough goods and enough smarts to be able to keep him from finishing me against the ropes. So I'm going to actually go with Adam Kownacki via decision. But yeah, let me know what you think about both of these co-main, and then we'll call it the third fight down on the Fury versus Wilder 3 undercard. Again, I'm just ecstatic that we have a fight card that's actually resembling one of the UFC pay-per-view fight cards where it's 3, 4, 5, sometimes 5 good fights deep. But yeah, let me know what you think about Efe Ajagba versus Frank Sanchez and Robert Helenius versus Adam Kownacki 2. Please leave your comments in the comments, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.